Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well today. I have been reading The Razor's Edge by William Somerset Maugham. You might remember my video about The Painted Veil, so after finishing that book, I have been interested in reading more by this author. He's most famous for a novel called Of Human Bondage, but The Razor's Edge particularly appealed to me. I think some people have compared it to The Great Gatsby. So I was curious to get into it, and my library had it on ebook. But as I've been reading it, I've been deeply impressed by his writing once again, although this is a very different writing style than The Painted Veil. I just kind of wanted to go over a few things and sort of analyze what makes him such a great writer. Why do his books really draw you in from the very beginning? So maybe I'll go back to, I'm not actually that far into the book yet. I haven't quite finished part 1, but I just wanted to do this while my thoughts were fresh on the subject. So the first chapter in this one was actually a little strange because it almost seemed like an author's preface. He's writing from the perspective of the narrator, who's also an author. I would say the first chapter actually wasn't that strong, but the second chapter, I'll just read a little bit of it to you. In 1919, I happened to be in Chicago on my way to the Far East, and for reasons that have nothing to do with this narrative, I was staying there for 2 or 3 weeks. I had recently brought out a successful novel, and being for the moment news, I had no sooner arrived than I was interviewed. And then after that, he kind of goes into this phone call with his acquaintance named Elliot Templeton. And I mentioned, I think it was in my book review of The Memory Police, which you can find on my blog. I'll put a link in the description. I mentioned I don't really like stories about stories. I'm not a huge fan of movies that are about Hollywood actors and stuff, but I think in this context it's kind of working because as the story progresses, it's not so much about this narrator's book, it's more about the people he meets in his life and the story as it's playing out in his life. So we get this really rich description of this character, Elliot Templeton, who is kind of a snob. He's someone that likes to move in the very best circles and buy fine art and things. Certainly a character, very much reminiscent of Gatsby in some regards, although not in personality necessarily. I was really struck by certain passages. Really like this paragraph in chapter 6. The following evening, having refused Elliot's telephoned offer to fetch me, I arrived quite safely at Mrs. Bradley's house. I had been delayed by someone who had come to see me and was a trifle late. So much noise came from the sitting room as I walked upstairs that I thought it must be a large party, and I was surprised to find that there were, including myself, only 12 people. Mrs. Bradley was very grand in green satin, with a dog collar of seed pearls around her neck, and Elliot in his well-cut dinner jacket looked elegant as he alone could look. When he shook hands with me, my nostrils were assailed by all the perfumes of Arabia. I was introduced to a stoutish, tall man with a red face, who looked somewhat ill at ease in evening clothes. He was a Dr. Nelson, but at the moment that meant nothing to me. The rest of the party consisted of Isabel's friends, but their names escaped me as soon as I heard them. So he's talking about a very seemingly mundane situation, but just in a few sentences, he's described the people in the room, what they look like, what they smell like, just sort of giving you the impression as if you had stepped into that room, where some people really are, like, their presences are very strong, and then others, like this Dr. Nelson, don't really make an impression on you, even if you're introduced to them. So this hierarchy of description is really effective, and I think he does that throughout. I mean, earlier in the book he does give pretty vivid descriptions of most of the main characters, like this Isabel and her boyfriend Larry, but there is a progression here of how the characters are introduced And I think he's good at sort of subtly pointing out their flaws. For example, this Elliot Templeton. If I have given the reader an impression that Elliot Templeton was a despicable character, I have done him injustice. So at the beginning, he talks about Templeton's snobbishness and ladder climbing in society, but then he comes back in chapter 4 and gives you a second look at him, a second description, which adds this better layer of understanding. And I really like that kind of writing because that's how real life is, right? Usually your first impressions of somebody are almost never the complete picture. So having this layered effect in the narrative is very effective. So that's literally all I had for this video. But let me know if you've read Maugham, what you think of his writing style. Let me know if you think it's effective, or, how does it compare to other authors, perhaps? There's a distinct difference between him and, like F. Scott Fitzgerald, for example. And as I read more of Maugham, I'll be able to figure out those differences more. But I'll be curious to hear your thoughts and whether you like his books, like The Razor's Edge or Of Human Bondage. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.